For weeks, I was convinced my husband was hiding an affair. After 17 years of marriage, you notice when something changes, the late nights, the sudden silence, the way Michael started keeping his phone face down like it held secrets I wasn't allowed to see. But the thing that truly kept me awake wasn't his distance. It was the locked room in our basement. That door had never been locked before. Yet every night I heard something faint from behind it, a movement, a cough, sometimes the soft scrape of a chair. I thought I was about to catch my husband betraying me. I had no idea that opening that door would reveal a secret his family had buried for 20 years. If you've ever felt that gut instinct that something isn't right in your own home, tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is there. And if stories about hidden family secrets pull you in, don't forget to like the video and subscribe so you don't miss what happens next. Before everything started to fall apart, our life was ordinary in the best possible way. I am Andrea Campbell, 43 years old, a middle school counselor in a quiet suburb outside Columbus, Ohio. My job is basically listening to kids who feel lost, angry, or invisible and helping them find words for feelings they don't understand yet. For years, I believed I was pretty good at recognizing when something was wrong in a person's life. Apparently, I was terrible at seeing it in my own home. Michael and I met when we were both in our 20s. He was working construction back then, saving money to start his own contracting business, and I was finishing my counseling degree. Our first apartment was small and drafty with peeling paint in the bathroom and a kitchen so narrow that if one of us opened the fridge, the other had to step outside. But we were happy. Michael had this easy laugh that filled the whole room. He used to wrap his arms around me from behind while I was cooking and kiss the side of my neck like we were still dating. On weekends, we'd sit on the living room floor with takeout containers because we couldn't afford a real dining table yet. Those early years weren't perfect, but they were honest. We built everything together. Every bill, every repair, every tiny victory. When we finally bought our house 10 years ago, a modest 2-story place with a finished basement, it felt like the biggest accomplishment of our lives. I remember standing in the empty living room with Michael and crying because it felt like we had actually made it. And then Lily came along. Our daughter is 14 now, tall for her age with dark hair that she constantly ties into a messy ponytail. She's the kind of kid who notices everything, the kind who watches people carefully before she says a word. Sometimes I joke that she inherited my counselor instincts. For most of Lily's life, Michael was the steady center of our family. He coached her little league team when she was younger. He helped her build a science fair volcano in the garage that nearly burned the workbench when the baking soda reaction exploded everywhere. He was present, reliable, solid. Which is why the changes started bothering me long before I admitted it to myself. At first, they were small things. Michael began coming home later than usual from work. Construction projects run behind schedule all the time, so I didn't think much of it in the beginning. But the pattern kept repeating. 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock, sometimes even later. When he walked through the door, he looked exhausted in a way that felt different from normal work fatigue. His shoulders sagged like he was carrying something heavier than lumber or drywall. I would ask how his day went, long he'd say. Then he'd change the subject. One evening, while he was in the shower, his phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. I glanced at it out of pure habit. The screen lit up with a notification, but instead of a name, it just showed a number. The message preview read, "Did you get the supplies?" I remember staring at the phone longer than I should have. Supplies for what? When Michael came back into the kitchen, I mentioned the text casually. "Oh," he said quickly, wiping his hair with a towel. "Work stuff." He flipped the phone face down on the counter. Something about the way he did it made my stomach tighten. Over the next few weeks, more small things started stacking up. Michael began stepping outside to take certain calls. Sometimes I could see him through the kitchen window pacing slowly across the backyard with his head down. Once I opened the back door and he ended the call immediately. "Everything okay?" I asked. "Yeah," he said, "too fast. Just work." But his voice sounded strained. Another night, I was folding laundry when I noticed one of his jackets smelled unfamiliar. Not perfume exactly, but something faint and floral, the kind of scent that didn't belong on construction clothes. I held the jacket for a moment, breathing in carefully. Then I told myself I was imagining things. Still, the uneasy feeling didn't go away. A week later, I stopped by a grocery store on my way home from work. When I opened my wallet to pay, a receipt slipped out and fell to the floor. It wasn't mine. I picked it up. The receipt was from a pharmacy across town, nowhere near Michael's usual job sites. The items listed weren't typical, either over-the-counter medication, antiseptic wipes, nutritional drinks, medical supplies. When I showed Michael the receipt that night, he barely glanced at it. Must have been from one of the guys on the crew, he said. How did it end up in your wallet? I asked. He shrugged. No idea. The conversation ended there, but the tension stayed in the air between us like a storm cloud that refused to move. Eventually, I did what most people do when doubt starts creeping into their marriage. I talked to my best friend. Tanya Brooks and I have known each other since college. She's the kind of person who never sugarcoats things, which is exactly why I trust her. We met for coffee one Saturday morning while Lily was at a debate club meeting. Tanya listened quietly while I explained everything: the late nights, the strange phone calls, the receipt. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair and studied my face. "Andrea," she said gently, "I'm going to ask you something and you might not like it." I already knew what she was going to say. "You think he's cheating?" I said quietly. Tanya didn't answer right away. Instead, she sighed. "I think those are the signs people usually notice when someone is hiding something," she said carefully. The words landed harder than I expected. I stared down at my coffee cup, watching the foam slowly dissolve into the dark liquid beneath it. "Michael wouldn't do that," I said automatically. But even as I spoke, doubt crept into the edges of my voice. Tanya reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "I hope you're right," she said. The drive home that afternoon felt strangely quiet. When I walked through the front door, Lily was sitting at the kitchen counter doing homework. "Hey, Mom," she said without looking up. "Dad called earlier." "Oh," I tried to keep my voice casual. "What did he want?" "He said he'd be late again." My chest tightened. "Did he say why?" "Nope." Lily shrugged. Then she finally looked up at me, her expression thoughtful. "Are you and Dad fighting or something?" The question caught me off guard. "What makes you think that I asked?" She hesitated. "You both seem weird lately. Kids notice everything, even the things we try hardest to hide." That evening, Michael came home around 10. He kissed Lily on the head, mumbled something about a long day, and headed straight for the shower. I stood alone in the kitchen for a long time after that, staring at the basement door at the end of the hallway. At the time, it was still unlocked. I had no idea that within a few weeks, that door and the room behind it would become the center of a mystery that would shake our entire family, and that the truth waiting behind it had nothing to do with another woman. Looking back now, I sometimes wonder exactly when suspicion turned into something darker, something closer to obsession. At first, it was just a feeling, a quiet, nagging thought that something in my marriage had shifted slightly off balance. But the more I noticed Michael's strange behavior, the harder it became to ignore the possibility that my instincts were trying to warn me. And once that thought takes root, it starts coloring everything. A week after I found the pharmacy receipt, the basement door changed. It happened on an ordinary Tuesday evening. I had just finished grading a stack of counseling reports from school and was standing at the kitchen sink rinsing dishes when Michael walked in, carrying a small hardware bag. "What's that?" I asked. "Just a lock," he said. "For what?" He nodded toward the hallway, the basement storage room. I frowned slightly. "Why, some of my tools have gone missing lately," he replied quickly. "Probably just the guys from work borrowing things, but I'd rather keep everything in one place." It sounded reasonable enough. Contractors were always lending tools to coworkers. Still, something about the explanation felt rushed. I followed him down the hallway as he installed the lock on the basement door. The metal clicked into place with a sharp, final sound that echoed through the quiet house. "Seems a little dramatic," I said lightly. Michael didn't laugh. "Just being careful," he replied. From that moment on, the basement door stayed locked. At first, I didn't think much about it, but a few days later, I noticed something else. Michael began spending more time downstairs. Sometimes he would come home from work, barely say hello, and head straight toward the basement carrying grocery bags or cardboard boxes. Other nights, he'd disappear down there after dinner for an hour or more. One evening, I watched him walk past the kitchen table with 2 large bags from the grocery store. "Need help?" I asked. "I've got it," he said quickly. But as he turned toward the basement stairs, I caught a glimpse inside the bag. Bottled water, canned soup, a stack of folded blankets. I felt a strange chill crawl up my spine. "Why are you bringing groceries downstairs?" I asked. Michael paused halfway down the steps. "For the job site," he said without turning around. "Just storing them here for now." Then he continued down the stairs before I could respond. I stood in the hallway long after the basement door closed behind him. Something about that explanation made no sense. Construction crews didn't store groceries in basement storage rooms. Over the next several days, my attention kept drifting toward that door. Sometimes, when the house was quiet, I thought I heard faint sounds from below. A creak, a soft shuffle. Once what sounded like the scrape of a chair across concrete. Every time I mentioned it, Michael brushed it off. "You're imagining things," he said. But the sounds kept happening. Then came the second lock. I discovered it on a Saturday afternoon while cleaning the hallway. The basement door was slightly open, and I noticed a second latch installed on the inside edge of the frame, a heavier lock than the first one. My stomach tightened. Why would a storage room need 2 locks? That evening, I decided to confront him. Michael was sitting at the kitchen table reviewing some paperwork from work when I walked in. "What's going on with the basement?" I asked. He looked up slowly. "What do you mean you installed another lock today?" Michael's jaw tightened slightly. "It's just extra security." "For what, my tools?" "That doesn't make sense," I said carefully. "No one is stealing your tools from our house." The room grew quiet. Michael set his pen down and leaned back in his chair. "Andrea," he said, his voice suddenly firm, "I need you to stay out of that room." The words hit me like a slap. "Stay out of it," I repeated. "Yes." "Why, it's work stuff." "Then why can't I see it?" Michael stood up from the table. "Because it's not important," he said, "and because I asked you not to." The tension between us felt thick enough to choke on. For 17 years of marriage, we had never had a conversation like this. Never. "What are you hiding from me?" I asked quietly. "Nothing, then open the door." Michael shook his head. "No." The word echoed through the kitchen like a gunshot. I stared at him, searching his face for the man I had built my life with, but in that moment he felt like a stranger. Without another word, Michael walked out of the room. That night, I barely slept. The more I replayed the conversation in my mind, the more convinced I became that something was terribly wrong. The next morning, while Michael was in the shower, I opened the laptop and logged into our joint bank account. At first, everything looked normal. Mortgage payments, utility bills, groceries. Then I noticed something unusual. Several transactions over the past month had been made at places I didn't recognize. One was a private medical clinic across town. Another was a medical supply store. The amounts weren't enormous, but they appeared regularly. I leaned closer to the screen. Why would Michael be buying medical supplies? My heart started pounding. Unless someone downstairs needed them. I sat back slowly in my chair. The pieces of the puzzle began rearranging themselves in my mind. Late nights, secret phone calls, medical supplies, groceries going into the basement, 2 locks on the door. Someone coughing through the vent. A horrifying possibility formed in my head. Michael wasn't just hiding an affair. He might be hiding a person. And suddenly, the locked basement room felt less like a storage space, and more like a secret apartment. My chest tightened as I stared at the hallway door. I didn't know who was down there, but one thing had become painfully clear. Whatever Michael was hiding, it was no longer just a suspicion. It was a secret living inside our house, and I was determined to uncover it. Once the idea formed in my mind that Michael might be hiding someone in our basement, it refused to leave. Every small detail began to reinforce the theory. My brain, trained by years of listening to troubled students describe the hidden parts of their lives, started assembling patterns whether I wanted it to or not. And the patterns were disturbing. For the next several days, I paid closer attention to Michael than I had in years. I watched the way he checked his phone when he thought no one was looking. I noticed the tension in his shoulders whenever I casually mentioned the basement. I saw the way he avoided my eyes when the certain topics came up. The man I had trusted with every part of my life suddenly felt like someone I barely recognized. By the following Thursday, my suspicion had turned into something more deliberate. Investigation. It started with a simple decision. If Michael wouldn't tell me the truth, I would find it myself. That afternoon, I left work a little earlier than usual. Instead of driving home, I parked across the street from Michael's construction site and waited. I felt ridiculous sitting there in my car like some kind of amateur detective, but the longer I thought about the locked basement door, the less ridiculous it seemed. Around 5 o'clock, Michael finally came out of the job site trailer. I expected him to drive home. Instead, he headed in the opposite direction. My heart started pounding as I pulled out behind him, keeping several cars between us so he wouldn't notice. We drove across the city toward the older west side of Columbus, where the neighborhoods grew rougher and the houses closer together. Many of the buildings looked like they hadn't been renovated in decades. Michael finally turned onto a narrow residential street lined with aging brick homes. I slowed my car and watched carefully as he parked in front of a small 2-story house with chipped paint and sagging porch steps. The house looked worn but lived in. A faded bicycle leaned against the railing. A cracked plastic lawn chair sat beside the door. Michael stepped out of his truck and walked up the porch steps. He knocked once. A few seconds later, the door opened, but I couldn't see who answered. Michael disappeared inside. I sat there gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. There it was, proof. He had come to see someone. I glanced at the clock on my dashboard. 5:22. The minutes crawled by, painfully slow. 5:30, 5:40, 6 o'clock. Finally, the door opened again. Michael stepped back outside. Even from across the street, I could see something strange in his posture. His shoulders were hunched forward, his head lowered slightly as if he had just received terrible news. He didn't look happy. He didn't look excited. He looked devastated. The expression confused me so much that for a moment I forgot to breathe. Michael walked down the porch steps and climbed into his truck. A few seconds later, he drove away. I waited until he turned the corner before starting my car. My heart pounded in my ears. If this was the woman he was seeing, I needed to know who she was. Slowly, I pulled up in front of the house. Up close, it looked even older than it had from across the street. The windows were slightly fogged, and one of the shutters hung crooked on its hinge. I climbed out of my car and walked up the porch steps. The wood creaked under my feet. For a moment, I hesitated. Then I knocked. Once, twice, no answer. I knocked again, louder this time. Still nothing. The house remained silent. I stood there for several seconds listening carefully, but I couldn't hear any movement inside. Finally, I stepped back from the door. As I turned to leave, the front door of the neighboring house opened. An older woman stepped onto her porch holding a watering can. She looked at me curiously. "Can I help you?" she called out. I forced a polite smile. "Oh, sorry, I was looking for someone who might live here." She glanced at the empty house next to her. "That place," she said. "Yes." The woman shook her head slowly. "That family's had a rough time lately." The word caught my attention immediately. "Family," I repeated. "Yeah," she said, "poor folks. Been dealing with a lot of health problems." I felt a flicker of confusion. "Health problems. Do you know their names?" I asked. The woman shrugged. "Not really, haven't talked much with them. Just see people coming and going sometimes. People, plural." My brain struggled to process the information. "Thanks," I said quickly. I walked back to my car, my thoughts spinning. If Michael was having an affair, why would the neighbor describe the house as a family dealing with health problems? The explanation didn't fit the story I had built in my head. Still, there was no denying what I had seen. Michael had visited that house, and he clearly didn't want me to know about it. The drive home felt longer than usual. When I finally pulled into our driveway, Michael's truck was already there. I sat in the car for a moment, trying to calm the storm of emotions inside my chest. Part of me felt furious. Another part felt strangely unsettled. The pieces didn't quite fit together. When I walked into the house, Lily was sitting at the kitchen table doing homework. "Hey, Mom," she said. "Hi, sweetheart. Dad's in the garage." "Okay." I set my purse down and walked through the door that led into the garage. Michael stood near his workbench sorting through a box of screws. For a moment, I simply watched him. He looked tired, more tired than I had ever seen him. "You're home early," he said without turning around. "So are you." He nodded. Job finished sooner than expected. I leaned against the door frame. "Busy afternoon." Michael paused slightly. "Yeah." "Where did you go after the site?" His shoulders stiffened almost immediately. "What do you mean, after the job site?" I said calmly. Michael finally turned to face me. The expression on his face was guarded. "I ran a few errands." "What kind of errands?" The silence stretched between us. "Work stuff," he said. The same answer. Always the same answer. I studied his face carefully. For a split second, something flickered in his eyes. Not guilt, not exactly. It looked more like fear, and that frightened me far more than any sign of an affair ever could. Because whatever Michael was hiding, it wasn't just a relationship, it was something much deeper. Something that was slowly tearing him apart from the inside. After the afternoon I followed Michael across Columbus, something inside me shifted. Before that day, my suspicions had mostly lived inside my head. Doubts, theories, uneasy feelings that came and went depending on how convincing Michael sounded when he brushed them off. But now I had seen it with my own eyes. He had gone somewhere he never mentioned. He had visited a house I didn't know about, and he had looked devastated when he left. The worst part wasn't even the possibility of betrayal anymore. It was the feeling that my entire life might be built on information I didn't have. For the next few days, I carried that feeling with me everywhere. At school, I tried to focus on my students' problems, but my mind kept drifting back to the locked basement door. One of my 7th graders sat across from me during a counseling session explaining how his parents were divorcing because his dad had been seeing someone else. As he spoke, I found myself wondering whether Lily might soon be telling that same story to someone else. The thought made my chest ache. That evening after dinner, I finally told Tanya everything. We were sitting in her living room while Lily and Tanya's son watched a movie in the basement. I explained how I had followed Michael, how he had gone into that small brick house, and what the neighbor had said. Tanya listened quietly, her brow furrowed. "So," she said slowly when I finished, "he's definitely hiding something." "Yes, and there's still the locked room at home." "Yes, and groceries going downstairs." I nodded. Tanya exhaled. "Okay," she said. "Let's talk about the possibilities." I already knew what she was thinking. "An affair," I said quietly. "That's still the most obvious explanation," Tanya admitted. "But the health problems," I asked. "The medical supplies." Tanya shrugged slightly. "Maybe the woman is sick." The idea made my stomach twist. I imagined Michael secretly caring for another woman somewhere while lying to me every day. The image felt unbearable. "You need to protect yourself," Tanya said gently. "Start documenting things." "What things?" "Financial records," she said. "Receipts. Anything unusual. If this ends in divorce, you'll want a clear picture of what's been happening." The word divorce felt heavy in the air between us. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then Tanya leaned forward. "Andrea, listen to me," she said softly. "I'm not saying your marriage is over, but if Michael is lying to you, you deserve to know the truth." I nodded slowly. That night, after Lily fell asleep, I opened the laptop again. For the next hour, I carefully reviewed our bank statements. Several transactions stood out. Repeated purchases from the medical supply store, more payments to the private clinic, and one new charge I hadn't noticed before. A purchase from a grocery store near the West Side neighborhood where Michael had gone earlier that week. My heart started beating faster. He had been buying food there too. For someone. The evidence was starting to form a picture I couldn't ignore. I printed copies of the transactions and tucked them into a folder inside my desk drawer. I hated doing it. It felt like I was quietly preparing for the collapse of my own life. The following evening, something happened that pushed my suspicions even further. I was sitting in the living room grading student reports when I heard a sound coming from the hallway vent. At first, I thought it was just the house settling. Then it happened again. A cough. Soft, weak, but unmistakably human. My entire body froze. The sound had come from the basement. I slowly stood up and walked toward the hallway. The basement door was closed, locked. The house was silent except for the faint hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. For several seconds, I simply stared at the door. My pulse thundered in my ears. Someone was down there, someone alive. My mind raced through the possibilities: a secret girlfriend, a runaway, someone Michael was hiding from me. The realization made my stomach twist. I took a step closer to the door, then another. Just as I reached for the doorknob, the garage door opened. Michael was home. I quickly stepped away from the basement door and returned to the living room. When he walked into the house, he looked even more exhausted than usual. "Hey," he said quietly. "Hi." He dropped his keys onto the counter and rubbed his face. "Long day." He nodded. "Yeah." I studied him carefully. "Did you stop by the west side again today?" His eyes flicked toward me instantly. "Why would you ask that?" The tension in his voice confirmed what I already suspected. "I was just wondering," I said calmly. Michael didn't respond. Instead, he walked past me and headed toward the basement hallway. My heart started racing. He unlocked the door quickly and slipped inside, closing it behind him. I heard the lock click again from the inside. For the next 20 minutes, I sat in the living room listening. Soft footsteps, a faint murmur of voices, and once another cough. When Michael finally came back upstairs, his expression looked strangely calm, like someone who had just finished checking on something important. "Everything okay?" I asked. "Yes," he said quickly. "What were you doing down there organizing tools?" The lie came so easily that it made my chest hurt. Later that night, after Michael fell asleep on the couch while watching television, I stood over him for a long time. His face looked peaceful in sleep, familiar. This was the man I had loved for nearly 2 decades, the man who held my hand when Lily was born, the man who once drove across 3 counties in the middle of the night to bring me soup when I had the flu. And yet now he was keeping a secret inside our home, a secret big enough to require locked doors, medical supplies, and hidden grocery deliveries. I looked toward the hallway again. The basement door was closed, silent, but I knew someone was behind it. And whatever Michael was hiding down there, it was only a matter of time before I uncovered the truth. The breaking point didn't come all at once. It built slowly, like pressure inside something sealed too tightly, until one moment finally made everything crack. For us, that moment came on a Thursday evening Lily's debate championship. She had been preparing for weeks. Every night after dinner, she would sit at the kitchen table rehearsing her arguments out loud while pacing back and forth. Sometimes she'd stop mid-sentence and ask Mom, "Does that sound convincing?" or "Dad, what would you say if someone challenged this point?" Michael had promised he would be there. Not just casually, he had made a point of it. "I wouldn't miss it," he told her just 2 nights before. Front row seat. Lily believed him. So did I. The competition was held at her school auditorium. Parents filled the seats, whispering quietly as students prepared backstage. I sat near the front, scanning the room every few minutes. Michael wasn't there. At first I told myself he was just running late. Traffic, work, something unavoidable. Lily stepped onto the stage with her debate partner, her posture straight, her voice steady, despite the nerves I knew she was feeling. I forced myself to focus on her performance. She was brilliant, confident, articulate in a way that made my chest swell with pride. But every time I glanced toward the entrance doors, my stomach tightened. Still no sign of Michael. By the time the event ended, Lily's team had won 2nd place. She walked toward me, holding her certificate, her smile bright but searching. "Did Dad see it?" she asked. The question hit me harder than anything else that night. I swallowed. "He got held up at work," I said carefully. Lily nodded slowly. "Oh." She didn't say anything else, but I saw the disappointment settle quietly behind her eyes. That look stayed with me all the way home. Michael didn't walk through the door until almost 10 that night. Lily had already gone upstairs. When he entered the kitchen, I was waiting. "You missed it," I said before he could speak. Michael paused. "I know," he said quietly. Something came up. Something always comes up. He set his keys down slowly. It was important. "So was your daughter," I snapped. The words came out sharper than I intended, but I didn't take them back. Michael exhaled. "I'll talk to her in the morning." "No," I said. "You should have been there tonight." Silence filled the kitchen. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then something inside me finally snapped. "Are you with her?" I asked. Michael blinked. "What is that, where you were?" I continued, my voice rising. "With the woman you've been hiding from me." His expression shifted instantly from confusion to something closer to shock. "Andrea, don't," I cut him off. "Don't lie to me again. I'm not. I followed you," I said. The words landed heavily between us. Michael went still. "You went to that house on the west side," I continued. "You've been buying groceries, medical supplies, disappearing for hours, locking me out of parts of my own home. What else am I supposed to think?" For a long moment, Michael just stared at me. Then he ran a hand over his face. "You think I'm cheating on you," he said quietly. "Tell me I'm wrong." He opened his mouth, then closed it again. That hesitation felt like confirmation. My chest tightened painfully. "Just tell me the truth," I whispered. Michael looked at me, and for a brief moment I saw something raw in his eyes. Not guilt, not exactly. Something deeper. "I can't," he said. The words felt like a knife. "You can't," I repeated. "Not yet." That was it. That was the moment everything changed. "Not yet," I said, my voice shaking. "After 17 years, after everything we've been through, you think I deserve not yet." "It's complicated," he said. "No," I snapped. "It's not complicated. You're either telling the truth or you're lying." Michael's jaw tightened. "I'm trying to protect you." The sentence made something inside me go cold. Protect me from what I asked. He didn't answer. Of course he didn't. The silence stretched until it became unbearable. I shook my head slowly. "I don't even recognize you anymore," I said. Michael flinched slightly, but he didn't argue. That hurt more than anything, because it meant he knew I was right. "I need space," I said finally. I turned and walked out of the kitchen before he could respond. That night, Michael slept on the couch. I lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment of the past few months in my mind. The late nights, the locked door, the cough, the lies, "not yet." The words echoed in my head over and over again. Sometime around midnight, I heard the front door open quietly, then close. I sat up in bed, my heart pounding. Michael was leaving. Again. I slipped out of bed and walked silently to the hallway. The house was dark. The basement door stood at the end of the hall. Locked. Silent. For a moment, I just stood there. Then I made a decision. I wasn't going to wait anymore. I couldn't. Whatever was happening inside that room had already begun tearing my family apart, and I refused to let it continue. I went back into the bedroom and grabbed a flashlight from the drawer. My hands trembled slightly as I returned to the hallway. The basement door felt different now, heavier, like it was holding something back, something that didn't want to be seen. I knelt down and examined the lock. It was sturdy but not impossible. Michael had installed it himself, and I knew enough about his work to understand how it was put together. For a moment I hesitated. Once I opened that door, there would be no going back. Whatever truth waited on the other side would change everything. I took a deep breath. Then I reached for the lock. Tonight I was going to find out what my husband had been hiding from me. No more lies, no more "not yet," just the truth. My hands were shaking so badly I had to steady them against the wall before I could even touch the lock. The hallway felt unnaturally quiet. No television, no footsteps upstairs. Just the faint hum of the house settling around me like it was holding its breath. I crouched in front of the basement door, the flashlight resting on the floor beside me. The beam cut across the wood, illuminating the metal lock Michael had installed just days earlier. I had watched him put it in, which meant I knew exactly how it worked. "Just turn the plate. Slide the pin," I whispered to myself, trying to remember. For a moment I hesitated. This was the point of no return. If I opened this door, I would be stepping into whatever truth Michael had been trying so hard to keep hidden. And no matter what I found, there was no way our lives would go back to the way they were before. But then I thought of Lily's face at the debate, the disappointment, the quiet confusion, and I knew I couldn't wait any longer. I reached forward and started working the lock. It took longer than I expected. My fingers slipped twice, my breath coming in shallow bursts as panic and adrenaline tangled together in my chest. Finally, a soft click. The sound echoed in the hallway like a gunshot. I froze, listened. Nothing, no footsteps, no voice calling my name. Michael wasn't home. Slowly, carefully, I turned the knob. The door creaked open. A wave of cool air drifted up from the basement, carrying with it a faint smell I couldn't quite place at first. Not perfume, not anything romantic, something clinical, something sterile. I picked up the flashlight and stepped inside. The stairs stretched downward into darkness. Each step felt heavier than the last as I descended the beam of light, trembling slightly with every movement of my hand. At the bottom of the stairs, I paused. The basement was dim, lit only by a small lamp in the far corner. Shadows clung to the walls, stretching across the concrete floor like something alive. And then I saw it. The door to the storage room, closed, locked, of course. My heart pounded so loudly I was certain whoever was inside could hear it. I moved closer, my footsteps slow and deliberate. The smell was stronger now, antiseptic, medication, something that had no place in a hidden, secret affair. My hand hovered over the second lock. This one was heavier, stronger. It took me longer to work it open. When it finally gave way, the sound felt too loud, too final. I swallowed hard and pushed the door open. The flashlight beam swept across the room, and everything I thought I would find vanished instantly. There were no candles, no soft blankets arranged for comfort, no sign of another woman. Instead, the room looked like something else entirely. A narrow bed stood against the wall, covered in plain sheets. Beside it sat a metal stand holding medical equipment tubes, bottles, an oxygen tank quietly humming. A small table nearby was covered with pill organizers neatly labeled with days of the week, stacks of folded towels, boxes of medical supplies. The air felt thick, heavy with the scent of antiseptic and something faintly metallic. My breath caught in my throat. This wasn't a secret affair. This was... A sound cut through the silence, a soft movement. I turned the flashlight toward the bed, and then I saw him. A man lay there, partially covered by a blanket. His body was thin, too thin, his face gaunt, his skin pale in the dim light. Dark circles shadowed his eyes, and faint scars traced along his jaw and neck. He looked fragile, broken in a way that had nothing to do with romance or betrayal. For a moment, I couldn't move. My brain struggled to process what I was seeing. This man wasn't supposed to be here. He wasn't supposed to exist. Then his eyes opened. Wide. Panicked. He flinched at the light, raising a trembling hand as if to shield himself. "No," he whispered, his voice rough and uneven. "No, no, no." The fear in his voice sent a shock through me. I'm sorry," I stammered, lowering the flashlight slightly. "I didn't—" Footsteps thundered above us, then down the stairs, fast, urgent. My heart dropped. Michael. He appeared in the doorway seconds later, his chest rising and falling as if he had run the entire way. For a moment, he just stood there, frozen, his eyes locked onto mine, and I saw it. Not anger, not even shock, pure, unfiltered terror. "Andrea," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I stepped back instinctively. "What is this?" I demanded, my voice shaking. "Who is he?" The man on the bed was breathing faster now, his body trembling under the blanket. Michael moved past me, quickly kneeling beside him. "It's okay," he said softly. "You're okay. It's just me." The man's eyes darted between us. "Who is she?" he asked weakly. Michael hesitated, then slowly he looked back at me. The silence stretched for what felt like forever, and then he said the words that shattered everything I thought I knew. "This is Ethan," he said. The name meant nothing to me at first. I shook my head. "I don't understand." Michael's jaw tightened. "My brother." The world tilted. "That's not possible," I whispered. Michael's brother had died. That's what he had told me, years ago, before we were even married. I remembered the conversation clearly, the quiet sadness in his voice. The way he said it had been a long time ago, that it wasn't something he liked to talk about. "You told me he was dead," I said. Michael closed his eyes briefly. "I know." My chest tightened painfully. "Then who is this?" I asked, my voice rising. Michael looked at me again, and this time there was no hiding the truth in his expression. "He's not dead," he said. The words hung in the air, heavy and impossible. Everything inside me went still. 17 years. 17 years of marriage, and somehow there had been a living, breathing person. His own brother hidden from me the entire time, in my house, in my basement, behind a locked door. I took a step back, my mind reeling. This doesn't make any sense," I whispered. Michael stood slowly. "I was going to tell you," he said. When I demanded. After how many more lies, he didn't answer. Of course he didn't, because there was no answer that could fix this. I looked at Ethan again, at his fragile body, at the fear still lingering in his eyes, and suddenly, The locked room downstairs wasn't about an affair anymore. It was something much bigger, something buried, something that had been hidden for years. And I realized with a cold, sinking certainty I had just opened the door to a secret that was going to change everything. For a long moment, no one spoke. The air in that small room felt too thick to breathe heavy with things unsaid, years of them. I stood near the doorway, the flashlight still in my hand, though I wasn't even using it anymore. The single lamp in the corner cast a dim yellow glow over everything, making the scene feel unreal, like I'd stepped into someone else's life. Michael was beside the bed, his attention entirely focused on the man he had just called his brother, Ethan. I repeated the name silently in my head, trying to attach meaning to it, trying to reconcile it with everything I thought I knew. "You told me he died," I said again, more quietly this time. Michael didn't look at me. "I know. That wasn't a misunderstanding," I continued. "That wasn't something I assumed. You told me. You said your brother was gone." Ethan shifted slightly under the blanket, his eyes darting between us, again confusion flickering across his face. "Are you fighting?" he asked, his voice fragile, almost childlike. Michael immediately softened. "No," he said gently. "Everything's okay." It was a lie. We all knew it. I took a step further into the room, my shoes scraping lightly against the concrete floor. "Okay," I repeated, disbelief rising in my chest. "You think this is okay?" Michael finally stood and turned toward me. "Andrea." "No." I cut him off, my voice sharper now. "You don't get to say my name like everything is normal." Ethan flinched at the sound of my voice. That small reaction hit me harder than I expected. I hadn't meant to scare him, but nothing about this situation felt controlled anymore. "What is this?" I asked, gesturing around the room. "What have you been doing?" Michael exhaled slowly, like he had been holding his breath for weeks. "I was trying to figure out how to tell you. You don't hide a human being in your basement while you figure out how to tell me," I said, my voice shaking with anger. "It wasn't supposed to be like this." "Then what was it supposed to be like?" Michael hesitated. That hesitation told me everything. He hadn't had a plan. He had just done it. Without me. Without considering what it would do to our family. Without trusting me enough to tell me the truth. "How long?" I asked. "A few weeks." The answer came too quickly. I shook my head. "No," I said, "not how long he's been here. How long have you known he was alive?" Michael's silence was answer enough. My stomach dropped. "How long, Michael?" I pressed. He swallowed. "Since before we got married." The room tilted. I had to steady myself against the wall to keep from losing my balance. "Before we got married," I repeated. 17 years. 17 years of shared life, of building a home, of raising a child. And this enormous truth had been buried the entire time. "You lied to me for 17 years, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Michael's expression tightened. "I didn't know how to explain it, so you just erased him?" I asked. "You decided he didn't exist?" "It wasn't that simple. It never is," I snapped. Ethan shifted again, pulling the blanket closer around himself. "I don't want to go back," he murmured suddenly, his voice trembling. The words cut through the tension like a blade. Michael turned to him immediately. "You're not going back," he said firmly. "I promise. Back where I asked." Michael didn't answer right away. I felt my patience snap completely. "Stop doing that," I said. "Stop leaving me in the dark." Michael rubbed his face, exhaustion etched into every line. He was in a care facility, he said, finally, for a long time. What kind of facility? A psychiatric one? The words landed heavily. I looked at Ethan again, at his thin frame, his trembling hands, the fear that seemed to sit just beneath the surface of every movement. "How long?" I asked. "Years," Michael said quietly, "most of his adult life." My chest tightened. "And now, he's just here," I asked. "He didn't have anywhere else to go. What about your mother?" I asked. "Where is she in all of this?" Michael's jaw tightened. "She can't take care of him anymore. Why, she's sick." The pieces started to shift again in my mind. The neighbor's words, health problems, a family going through something. It hadn't been an affair. It had been this. And yet somehow that didn't make it easier. It made it worse. Because this wasn't just betrayal. It was a lifetime of lies. "You should have told me," I said. Michael looked at me, his eyes filled with something I couldn't quite name. I wanted to. No, I said, shaking my head. You didn't. Because if you wanted to, you would have. Ethan let out a small, uneven breath. Is she mad at me? He asked quietly. The question stopped me cold. I looked at him fully for the first time. He wasn't looking at Michael anymore. He was looking at me. His eyes were wide, uncertain, almost pleading. Something inside me shifted. I'm not mad at you, I said gently. He studied my face carefully as if trying to decide whether he believed me. Then he nodded slightly and looked down at his hands. I turned back to Michael. You brought him here, I said. Into our home, without telling me. I didn't have a choice. You always have a choice, I said firmly. Not this time. The conviction in his voice made me pause. What does that mean? I asked. Michael hesitated again. Then he glanced at Ethan. He can't handle being around too many people, he said carefully. New environments, they trigger him. So you hit him, I said. I was trying to stabilize things first. And in the process, you destabilized everything else, I replied. Michael flinched slightly. Lily can't find out like this, he said. I stared at him in disbelief. Like this, I repeated. You mean the truth? She won't understand, and you think she'll understand lies, I shot back. Michael didn't answer. Because there was no good answer, I took a slow breath, trying to steady myself. The anger was still there, the hurt, the betrayal, but underneath all of it, something else was starting to surface. Understanding, not forgiveness, not yet, but the realization that whatever Michael had been hiding, it wasn't simple. It wasn't selfish in the way I had imagined. It was messy, complicated, and deeply painfully human. Still, that didn't excuse what he had done. You should have trusted me, I said quietly. Michael looked at me. I was afraid if I told you, you'd look at me differently. I held his gaze. I already do. The words hung between us, heavy, final. And for the first time since I opened that door, I realized something with absolute clarity. The locked room downstairs hadn't just been hiding Ethan. It had been hiding a version of my husband I had never truly known. And now that I had seen it, there was no going back. I didn't sleep that night. After everything that had happened in the basement, the house no longer felt like the same place. Every room carried a different weight now, as if the truth had seeped into the walls and changed the air itself. Michael stayed downstairs with Ethan. I could hear faint movement through the vents, soft footsteps, the occasional murmur of his voice trying to calm him. It wasn't the same as the nights before, when those sounds filled me with suspicion and fear. Now they filled me with something else, a heavy, complicated kind of sorrow. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment of the past 17 years. Conversations, silences, the way Michael would sometimes withdraw for no clear reason, like he was carrying something he couldn't explain. It had always been there. I just hadn't known what I was looking at. By morning, I felt like a different person. Not calmer, not at peace, just aware. When I walked into the kitchen, Lily was already there, pouring cereal into a bowl. "Morning," she said. "Morning." She glanced at me briefly. "You okay?" The question caught me off guard. "Why wouldn't I be?" I asked carefully. She shrugged. "You just look tired. I didn't sleep well." "Me neither," she said, sitting down at the table. "Dad didn't come upstairs last night." My chest tightened. "He had some work to finish," I said. The lie came out automatically, and I hated myself for it. Lily frowned slightly. "He's been working a lot lately, I know." She stirred her cereal absently. "Are you guys fighting?" she asked again. The same question, the same quiet concern. I forced a small smile. "No, we're just dealing with some things." "What things?" I hesitated. "I'll explain soon," I said gently. Lily studied my face for a moment longer, then nodded. "Okay." But I could tell she didn't fully believe me. And why would she? By the time Michael came upstairs, Lily had already left for school. He looked exhausted, worse than the night before. There were dark circles under his eyes, and his movements felt slower, heavier. We stood in the kitchen for a moment without speaking. Finally, I broke the silence. "How is he?" I asked. Michael leaned against the counter. "He didn't sleep much." "What about you?" He let out a dry, humorless breath. "Same." I nodded. The tension between us was still there, but it had shifted. It wasn't sharp and explosive like before. It was quieter now, more fragile. "We need to talk," I said. Michael nodded slowly. I know. I pulled out a chair and sat down at the table. He joined me a moment later. For a few seconds, neither of us spoke. Then I asked the question that had been building inside me all night. What happened to him? Michael stared down at his hands. For a long time, he didn't answer. When he finally did, his voice was low. Our dad, he said. The words were enough to make my stomach drop. What about him? Michael swallowed. He was not a good man. That was an understatement. I could hear it in the way he said it. How bad? I asked quietly. Michael's jaw tightened. Bad enough that Ethan never really got out of it. The room felt colder. What do you mean? Michael leaned back slightly, staring at a point somewhere past me. He focused on Ethan more than me, he said. I was older. I figured out how to stay out of his way. But Ethan, he couldn't. My chest tightened painfully. How old was he? I asked. When it started? Maybe 6, 7. I closed my eyes briefly. That was Lily's age not that long ago. He hurt him? I asked. Michael let out a slow breath. Yeah. The word landed heavily. Physically, I pressed. Andrea... Michael hesitated. I opened my eyes and looked at him. I need to understand, I said. Michael nodded slowly. Physically, he said. Emotionally. Everything. The weight of it settled over me. And your mom? I asked. Michael's expression hardened. She knew. That was worse. What did she do? Nothing. The silence that followed felt suffocating. Nothing. I repeated. She pretended it wasn't happening, Michael said. Said it was discipline. Said Ethan was difficult. My stomach twisted. Was he? Michael shook his head. He was just a kid. The simplicity of that statement made my throat tighten. What happened after that? I asked. Michael rubbed his hands together slowly. When we got older, Ethan started acting out, he said. Anger, panic attacks. Things he couldn't control. That makes sense, I said softly. Michael nodded. But back then, nobody called it trauma, he continued. They called it being unstable. The word hung in the air. Unstable. I thought of Ethan's face in the basement, the fear in his eyes. What happened to your dad? I asked. He died, Michael said. Heart attack. There was no emotion in his voice. Just a flat statement. And Ethan, I asked. Michael's shoulders tensed. He tried to tell people what had happened, he said. Tried to make it public. And Michael looked down again. No one believed him. My chest tightened. Not even your mom. She shut him down completely, Michael said. Said he was making things up. Said he was embarrassing the family. I felt anger rise inside me. What happened then? Michael hesitated. Then he said, there was an incident. My stomach dropped. What kind of incident? Michael closed his eyes briefly. He hurt someone, he said, not intentionally. He was having a breakdown. He panicked. Someone got injured. The room felt like it was spinning slightly, and that's when they sent him away, I said. Michael nodded. Psychiatric care. For how long? Years. The word echoed in my mind. Years. And you just left him there? I asked. The question came out sharper than I intended. Michael flinched. I didn't know what else to do, he said. You could have stayed, I said. I tried. He said quickly. At first, but it was hard. Seeing him like that, knowing I couldn't fix it. So you told everyone he was dead? I asked. Michael's silence was answer enough. My chest tightened. That's how you coped? I asked. By erasing him, I thought it would be easier, he said quietly. For who? I demanded. Michael didn't answer, because we both knew the truth. It had been easier for him, not for Ethan. I leaned back in my chair, trying to process everything. So all these years, I said slowly, you knew he was alive. Yes. And you never told me. No. Why now? I asked. Why bring him here after all this time? Michael exhaled. Mom couldn't take care of him anymore, he said. And the facility, they were going to move him somewhere worse. Somewhere overcrowded, underfunded. So you stepped in. I had to. And you didn't think to include me in that decision? I asked. Michael looked at me. I was afraid you'd say no. I stared at him. And that gave you the right to lie to me. He didn't answer. Because again, there was no answer. The truth sat between us, heavy and undeniable. This wasn't just about Ethan. It was about trust. 17 years of it, broken in a way that couldn't be fixed overnight. I stood up slowly. I need time, I said. Michael nodded. I understand. I turned toward the hallway, toward the basement door, the locked room that wasn't locked anymore, and for the first time I realized something that unsettled me deeply. The mystery was gone. But the real problem, the real damage had only just begun. The truth didn't settle into our home gently. It didn't sit quietly in a corner waiting to be processed. It spread. It pressed into everything: our conversations, our routines, the spaces between us. And then, just when I thought we might have a moment to breathe, everything unraveled. It happened 2 days later. Saturday morning, Lily was home sitting at the kitchen table working on a history assignment while music played softly through her headphones. Michael had gone out early to pick up more supplies, and I was trying to maintain some sense of normalcy, wiping counters, organizing dishes, doing anything that made the house feel like it still belonged to us. But my attention kept drifting to the basement door. It was no longer locked. That alone felt strange, exposed. Around mid-morning, I heard something. A faint thud, then another. I froze. The sound came from the basement. My heart began to race. I moved slowly toward the hallway, trying not to make noise. "Mom," Lily called from the kitchen. "Did you hear that?" "Yes," I said carefully. "Stay there." I reached the basement door and listened. Another sound. Footsteps. Unsteady. My stomach dropped. Ethan, he wasn't supposed to be moving around alone. I opened the door slowly and stepped onto the first stair. "Ethan," I called softly. No answer, just the sound of movement below. I descended quickly now, my pulse pounding in my ears. When I reached the bottom, I saw him. He was halfway across the basement floor, barefoot, his thin frame trembling slightly as he moved. He looked disoriented, lost. "Ethan," I said again, keeping my voice gentle. "Hey, it's okay." He turned toward me slowly. For a moment his eyes didn't seem to recognize me. Then panic flashed across his face. "I have to go," he muttered. "I have to go, I have to go." "No," I said, stepping forward. "You're safe. You don't need to go anywhere." He shook his head frantically. "No, no, no, he'll be angry." My chest tightened. "He's not here," I said softly. "You're okay." But he wasn't listening. He moved past me, heading toward the stairs. "Ethan, wait." He climbed them quickly, his movements uneven but urgent. I followed close behind. By the time we reached the hallway, Lily had already taken off her headphones. She stood near the kitchen entrance, staring. "What's going on?" she asked. And then she saw him. Everything stopped. Ethan froze at the top of the stairs, his body going rigid as he realized someone else was there. Lily's eyes widened. "Mom," she whispered. I felt the moment crack open. There was no controlling this now, no preparing it, no soft explanation. This was it. This is... I started, but the words wouldn't come. How do you explain something like this? How do you tell your daughter that there has been a stranger living in your basement, that your entire family has been built on a truth that wasn't true? Ethan took a step back, his breathing uneven. "Who is she?" he asked, his voice shaking. Lily looked between us, her confusion turning into something sharper. "Who is he?" she asked. The questions collided in the air, and I realized with a sinking certainty that there was no version of this that didn't hurt. "Lily," I said gently, "I need you to stay calm." "Okay, I am calm," she said quickly, though her voice trembled. "Just tell me what's going on." Ethan shook his head again. "I didn't mean to," he whispered. "I didn't mean to come up. It's okay." I said, though nothing about this felt okay. Lily took a slow step forward. "Mom," she said more firmly now, "who is he?" Before I could answer, the front door opened. Michael. He stepped into the house carrying a paper bag. The moment he saw us standing there in the hallway, Ethan exposed Lily, staring. His face went pale. For a second, no one moved. Then everything collapsed at once. "What happened?" Michael asked, dropping the bag onto the floor. "He came upstairs," I said. Michael's eyes moved to Lily. And I saw it again. That same fear. Only this time it wasn't hidden. It was fully exposed. "Lily," he said carefully. She stepped back. "No," she said. "No, you don't get to just say my name like everything's normal." Michael flinched. "I can explain." "Then do it," she said, her voice rising. "Right now." The room felt too small, too tight. Michael looked at me briefly. I gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. There was no hiding this anymore. "This is Ethan," Michael said slowly. Lily frowned. "Okay." And Michael hesitated. "He's my brother." The silence that followed was deafening. "What Lily said," my brother Michael repeated. "But you said..." Lily's voice cracked. "You said your brother died." Michael swallowed. "I know." Lily looked at me. "Mom, what is he talking about?" I took a slow breath. "He's telling the truth," I said softly. Lily's expression shifted. Confusion, hurt, betrayal. You knew she asked. The question cut deeper than anything else so far. I just found out, I said. But it didn't matter. From her perspective, we were both part of the lie. You both lied to me, she said. No, I said quickly. Lily, listen, don't, she snapped. The word hit like a slap. I've been asking what's wrong for weeks, she continued, and you both just kept acting like everything was fine. Michael stepped forward. We were trying to protect you from what Lily demanded. The truth? Her voice broke slightly on the last word. Ethan shifted nervously behind us. I should go, he said quietly. No, Michael said immediately, but the damage was already done. Lily shook her head, tears filling her eyes. This is insane, she said. There's a random man living in our basement, and you thought I wouldn't notice. Eventually. He's not random, Michael said. Then why didn't you tell me about him, she shot back. Michael didn't answer, because there was no answer that could fix this. Lily laughed bitterly. You missed my debate for this, she said. For him. That's not fair, Michael said. It's exactly fair, she replied. Her voice dropped quieter now, but heavier. You chose him over us. The words hung in the air. Michael's face tightened. That's not what this is. Then what is it? Lily asked. No one answered, because the truth was too complicated to explain in a moment like this. Too heavy, too layered. Lily wiped her eyes quickly. I need to go, she said. Where, I asked. Just somewhere, she said. Lily, I'll be back, she said, already heading toward the door. The front door slammed shut behind her. And just like that, the house fell silent again. But this silence felt different. Heavier, broken. I turned slowly toward Michael. This is what I meant, I said quietly. You didn't protect us. Michael didn't respond. He just stood there, staring at the door Lily had just walked out of. And for the first time since all of this began, I realized something with absolute clarity. The secret wasn't just something hidden in the basement anymore. It was something that had now torn its way through every part of our family. And there was no putting it back. After Lily slammed the door, the silence that followed felt heavier than anything we had experienced so far. It wasn't just tension anymore. It was damage. Real, visible damage that had spread from the basement into every part of our lives. For several seconds, no one moved. Michael stood frozen near the hallway, staring at the door as if he could somehow undo what had just happened. Ethan had retreated halfway back down the basement stairs, his body curled inward like he was trying to disappear into himself. And I stood in the middle of it, all feeling like the ground beneath my feet had shifted into something unstable and unfamiliar. I'm going after her, I said finally. Michael didn't respond right away. Then quietly, she needs space. I turned to him sharply. She's 14, Michael. She doesn't need space. She needs her parents. The words hit harder than I expected. Michael flinched slightly. I'll go, I said, grabbing my keys from the counter. Wait, he said, stepping forward. I'll come with you. I shook my head. No, you need to stay here. His expression tightened. With him, he asked. Yes, I said firmly. Ethan shifted at the sound of my voice. I didn't mean to make her upset, he murmured. My chest tightened again. I know, I said gently. This isn't your fault. Michael looked between us, clearly torn. I'll handle it, I told him. But when I get back, we need to figure out what happens next. He nodded slowly. I didn't wait for anything else. I stepped outside, the cool air hitting my face like a shock to my system. Lily couldn't have gone far. She didn't drive yet. I scanned the street quickly, then started walking toward the small park at the end of our block. It was the first place she always went when she needed to think. Sure enough, I found her sitting on one of the benches near the playground. Her arms were wrapped tightly around herself, her shoulders hunched forward. For a moment, I just stood there watching her, trying to figure out how to fix something that felt impossibly broken. Then I walked over and sat beside her. She didn't look at me. I'm sorry, I said quietly. She let out a short, humorless laugh. For what part? The question stung. All of it, I said. She shook her head. I don't even know what all of it is, she said. 1 minute, everything is normal, and the next there's a stranger living in our basement who's apparently family. Her voice cracked slightly on the last word. He's not a stranger, I said gently. He is to me, she replied. I nodded. That's fair. She finally looked at me then. Her eyes were red. Why didn't you tell me, she asked. The question again. And this time I didn't try to soften it because I didn't know I said honestly. Not until last night. She studied my face carefully. "You're not lying," she asked. "No." She looked away again. "But you knew something was wrong," she said. "Yes, and you still didn't tell me." I swallowed. "I was trying to figure it out first." "That's exactly what Dad said," she replied bitterly. The comparison hit harder than I expected. "I know," I said softly, "and now I understand why that wasn't the right choice." Lily was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I feel stupid." "Why, because I kept asking what was going on," she said. "And you both just kept acting like everything was fine." My chest tightened. "You're not stupid," I said. "You were paying attention." "That doesn't help," she muttered. I hesitated, then asked carefully, "Are you scared?" She didn't answer right away. Then she nodded. "A little of him," I asked. "I don't know," she admitted. "He just looked at me like he didn't know where he was." "That's because he's been through a lot," I said. "What kind of a lot?" she asked. I exhaled slowly. "The kind we're going to talk about," I said, "but not all at once." She nodded slightly. "Okay." We sat there for a few minutes in silence. Then Lily asked, "Is he staying?" The question lingered. "I don't know yet," I said honestly. She looked back at me. "Do you want him to?" I didn't answer immediately, because the truth was complicated. "I want to make sure everyone is safe," I said finally, "including you." She nodded slowly. "Okay." We walked home together after that. The house felt different when we stepped inside, quieter, more fragile. Michael was in the living room pacing slowly. When he saw Lily, he stopped immediately. "Hey," he said softly. Lily didn't respond right away. She set her bag down and crossed her arms. "You should have told me," she said. Michael nodded. "I know, that's not enough," she said. "I know that too," he replied. The honesty in his voice seemed to catch her off guard. For a moment, she didn't say anything. Then she asked, "Is he dangerous?" The question hung in the air. Michael shook his head. "No." "Then why was he hidden?" she asked. Michael glanced at me briefly, then back at Lily. "Because I didn't handle this the right way," he said. That answer, simple as it was, seemed to land better than anything else. Lily looked at him for a long moment. Then she nodded slightly. "Okay." It wasn't forgiveness, but it was something. A small step. That evening, things remained tense but calmer. Lily stayed mostly in her room. Michael checked on Ethan frequently, and I moved through the house feeling like I was balancing on something fragile. But we didn't get the chance to settle into that new reality, because the next disruption came quickly. The following afternoon, there was a knock at the door. I wasn't expecting anyone. When I opened it, a woman stood on the porch, mid-60s, well-dressed, sharp eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. For a second, I didn't recognize her. Then something clicked. The resemblance, the shape of her face, the expression in her eyes. "Can I help you?" I asked carefully. She studied me. "You must be Andrea," she said. My stomach tightened. "Yes." She gave a small, controlled smile. "I'm Patricia Campbell," she said. "Michael's mother." Everything inside me went still. "I think we need to talk," she added. And just like that, I knew, whatever we thought we had uncovered so far, there was still more, much more. I didn't invite her in right away. For a moment, Patricia Campbell and I just stood there, facing each other across the threshold of my front door, like two people on opposite sides of a line neither of us had chosen. She looked exactly how I imagined she would. Composed, controlled, the kind of woman who knew how to keep things contained no matter what was happening underneath. "I didn't know you were coming," I said carefully. "That's the point," she replied. Her voice was smooth, measured, but there was something cold beneath it. "I need to speak with my son," she added. The words weren't a request, they were a decision. I stepped aside anyway. "Come in." She walked past me without hesitation, her eyes scanning the house briefly as if assessing it, judging me. Michael appeared from the hallway the moment he heard her voice. When he saw her, his entire body stiffened. "Mom," he said. Patricia gave a small nod. "Michael." There was no warmth in the exchange, no relief, just tension, thick and immediate. Lily hovered near the stairs, watching quietly. I moved closer to her, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. "It's okay," I whispered. She didn't look convinced. Michael took a step forward. "What are you doing here?" he asked. Patricia clasped her hands together neatly in front of her. "I think you know why she said." Michael's jaw tightened. "No," he said. "Actually, I don't." Her eyes flicked briefly toward the hallway, toward the basement. That was all the confirmation I needed. My stomach dropped. "You've been in contact with them," Michael said quietly. Patricia didn't deny it. "They reached out," she said. "There were irregularities." "Of course there were," Michael muttered. "What does that mean?" I asked. Both of them turned toward me. Patricia studied me for a moment as if deciding how much I was worth including. Then she said, "The facility where Ethan was staying has been reviewing their records. When a patient disappears without proper documentation, it raises concerns." "Disappears," Lily repeated from behind me. The word hung in the air. Michael exhaled sharply. "I didn't kidnap him," he said. "He left with me willingly." "That's not how they see it," Patricia replied calmly. My chest tightened. "You're saying someone is looking for him?" I asked. Patricia nodded slightly. "Yes." A wave of anxiety rolled through me. "So what happens now?" I asked. Patricia's expression didn't change. "He needs to go back." The words hit like a blow. "No," Michael said immediately. His voice was firm, unyielding. Patricia looked at him steadily. "You don't have the resources to care for him," she said. "You don't have the training." And clearly her eyes flicked briefly toward Lily. "You don't have the environment." Anger surged through me. "You mean a home?" I said sharply. "Because last time I checked, that's exactly what he didn't have." Patricia's gaze shifted to me again. Cool, unmoved. "This is not your situation to manage," she said. "It became my situation the moment my husband brought him into our house," I replied. Michael stepped slightly closer to me. A small, almost unconscious movement, but I noticed, and so did Patricia. Her expression hardened just slightly. "Michael," she said, her tone sharpening, "you are making this far more complicated than it needs to be." "No," he said. "I'm fixing something that should have been handled a long time ago." That was the first time I had heard him speak to her like that. Patricia's eyes narrowed. "Be very careful," she said quietly. "About what he asked, about rewriting history." The tension in the room thickened. "What does that mean?" Lily asked softly. No one answered her. I stepped forward. "It means," I said, my voice steady despite the storm inside me, "that there's more to this story than any of us have been told." Patricia's eyes met mine. For a moment, something flickered there. Not guilt, not regret. Something closer to irritation. "You don't understand the situation," she said. "Then explain it." I replied, silence. Michael looked at her. "Go ahead," he said. "Tell them." Patricia's jaw tightened. "This is not appropriate. Tell them." Michael repeated louder this time. The room went still. Lily shifted beside me. I could feel her tension through the slight movement of her shoulder. Patricia exhaled slowly. Then she said, "Ethan has always been difficult." The word immediately made my stomach turn. "Difficult," I repeated. Michael let out a bitter laugh. "That's what you're going with." Patricia ignored him. "He required more attention," she continued. "More discipline." "Discipline," I said, my voice rising. "Structure," she corrected smoothly. "Is that what you call it?" Michael asked. His voice was sharp now, cutting. Patricia turned to him. "I did what I had to do," she said. "No," Michael replied. "You did what was easiest. That's not fair." "What's not fair," he shot back, "is pretending none of it happened." The air in the room felt electric. I stepped closer. "What happened?" I asked. This time, neither of them could ignore the question. Patricia looked at me, then at Lily, and for a brief moment I thought she might actually tell the truth. But instead she said, "There were challenges, behavioral issues, emotional instability. Every word felt like a deflection, a way to avoid saying something else, something real." "That's not an answer," I said. "It's the only one you need," she replied. "No," Michael said, "it's not." He turned to me. "Andrea," he said quietly, "she knew." The words landed heavily. My chest tightened. Knew what I asked. Michael didn't hesitate this time. "He was being hurt," he said. The room went silent. Completely. Even the air seemed to stop moving. Lily's hand tightened slightly on my arm. I felt it. Felt her fear. What she whispered. I looked at Patricia. Her expression hadn't changed. Not even a little. "You knew I asked." She didn't answer. "Answer me," I said, my voice shaking now. Finally, she spoke. It wasn't as simple as that. Rage surged through me. "It is exactly that simple," I snapped. "You either knew or you didn't." Patricia's lips pressed into a thin line. I was managing a household, she said. There were complexities. You let it happen, Michael said. The accusation hung in the air, heavy, unavoidable. Patricia looked at him, and for the first time I saw something crack. Just for a second, then it was gone. I made the best decisions I could at the time, she said. No, Michael replied. You made the easiest ones. Silence fell again. This time it felt different. Heavier, colder, more final. I looked between them, at the woman who had protected appearances, at the man who had buried the truth. And suddenly everything made sense. Not in a way that made it okay, but in a way that explained how something like this could exist for so long. It hadn't been one lie, it had been a system of them, built over years, protected by silence, reinforced by fear. I think you should leave, I said quietly. Patricia turned toward me. This is still my family, she said. No, I replied. This is my home. The distinction mattered, and she knew it. For a moment she didn't move, then she gave a small nod. We'll continue this conversation soon, she said. It sounded less like a suggestion, and more like a warning. She walked toward the door without another word. When it closed behind her, the house felt different again. Not lighter, not yet, but clearer. Because now, for the first time, the truth wasn't hidden anymore, and there was no one left to pretend otherwise. The house stayed quiet for a long time after Patricia left. Not the tense, suffocating silence we had been living in for weeks. Something else. A silence that came after truth had finally been spoken out loud, raw, incomplete, but impossible to take back. Lily didn't say anything at first. She just stood beside me, her hand still lightly gripping my arm, as if she needed to anchor herself to something real. Michael remained in the middle of the room, his shoulders slightly slumped, like a man who had just carried something heavy for far too long and didn't know what to do now that he had set it down. I took a slow breath. We need a plan, I said. The words felt strange, clinical, but necessary. Michael nodded faintly. I know. I looked at Lily. Do you want to go to your room for a bit? I asked gently. She hesitated. No, she said. I want to hear this. I studied her face. There was fear there, but also determination. She wasn't going to let herself be shut out again. Okay, I said softly. You can stay. I turned back to Michael. Then we're not doing this halfway anymore, I said. No more hiding things, no more decisions made without all of us. Michael met my gaze. I understand. Do you? I asked quietly. He didn't look away. Yes. I nodded once. Good. Then let's start with the most important question. I paused. What happens to Ethan? Michael exhaled slowly. I don't want to send him back, he said. To that facility, I asked. Yes, why? He hesitated. Because it's not right, he said finally. They're understaffed. He gets lost in the system. No one actually sees him. I thought of Ethan's eyes, the way he had looked at me uncertain, searching almost apologetic for existing. I believe you, I said. Michael blinked slightly as if he hadn't expected that. But believing you doesn't solve the problem, I continued. We're not equipped to handle this alone. He nodded. I know, so we need help, I said. Professional help, Lily added quietly. We both looked at her. Her voice was steadier now, more grounded. Yes, I said, professional help. Michael ran a hand through his hair. I've been trying to manage it, he admitted. Medication routines, keeping things calm. And that's exactly why this can't continue the way it is, I said gently. You're trying to carry something that was never meant to be handled alone. Michael didn't argue, because he couldn't. We all knew it was true. I can reach out to some contacts, I said, through the school. There are trauma-informed specialists, case managers, people who know how to navigate situations like this. Michael looked at me carefully. You'd do that. The question caught me off guard. Of course I would, I said. He hesitated. Even after everything, I held his gaze. This isn't about what you did, I said. It's about what we do next. Lily shifted slightly. So, he's staying, she asked. For now, I said, but not like this. What does that mean, she asked. It means we make this safe, I said, for everyone. Lily nodded slowly. Okay. There was a small pause. Then she added, Can I see him again? Michael looked surprised. You want to? She shrugged slightly. I don't know. I just don't want him to feel like he has to hide. The words hit deeper than she probably realized. I glanced at Michael. He looked at me. For a moment, we didn't need to speak. We both understood. "Okay," he said softly. We walked toward the basement together. This time, no one hesitated at the door. No one avoided eye contact. No one pretended something wasn't there. Michael went down first, then Lily, then me. Ethan was sitting on the edge of the bed when we entered, his posture tense, as if he had been listening for us. He looked up immediately. His eyes landed on Lily, and then quickly dropped to the floor. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. The apology was immediate, instinctive, like something he had said many times before. Lily frowned slightly. For what she asked. Ethan hesitated. "For being here," he said. My chest tightened. "No," Lily said quickly. "That's not... You don't need to apologize." Ethan glanced at her briefly as if unsure whether he believed that. Lily took a small step forward. "I'm Lily," she said. Ethan blinked. Then slowly, Ethan. There was something almost childlike about the exchange. Simple, uncomplicated, a stark contrast to everything that had brought us here. Lily looked around the room, at the medical supplies, the oxygen tank, the carefully arranged medications. "This is where you've been staying?" she asked. Ethan nodded slightly. "It's temporary," Michael said quickly. Lily looked at him. "It better be," she replied. There was no anger in her voice, just honesty, an expectation. I stepped forward. "Ethan," I said gently, "we're going to start making some changes. Okay?" He looked up at me, uncertain. "What kind of changes?" he asked. "The kind that help you," I said, "not hide you." He seemed to consider that. Then he nodded. "Okay." The simplicity of his response made something inside me ache, because it was clear no one had ever really asked him what he needed before. They had just decided for him, controlled him, hidden him. I turned to Michael. "This starts now," I said quietly. He nodded. "No more secrets. No more secrets," I repeated. For the first time since all of this began, the words didn't feel like a promise made out of fear. They felt like a boundary, a line we were choosing not to cross again. Later that evening, after we had made calls, discussed options, and started putting the first pieces of a real plan together, I stood at the bottom of the basement stairs and looked back at the room. It was still the same space, same walls, same bed, same equipment, but it didn't feel the same anymore. It wasn't a hidden place now. It wasn't a locked room filled with secrets. It was just a room. And that difference mattered more than I could explain, because for the first time the truth was no longer buried inside it. And neither were we. The next few weeks felt like walking through the aftermath of a storm. Nothing was entirely destroyed, but nothing was untouched either. Every part of our lives had shifted, and we were still figuring out how to stand on the new ground beneath us. The first change came quickly. Within days, I connected with a trauma specialist through the school district, Dr. Karen Ellison, a calm, observant woman who spoke with the kind of patience that made people feel safe before they even realized why. She agreed to meet Ethan, not in the basement, not in a hidden space, but in a proper clinical setting where he could be evaluated with care and dignity. Convincing Ethan wasn't easy. The idea of leaving the house triggered immediate anxiety. "I don't want to go back," he said the first time we brought it up. "You're not going back," I reassured him gently. "This is different." He didn't believe me at first. Why would he? Every place he had ever been sent to had taken something from him. Trust wasn't something he could just rebuild overnight. But slowly, with Michael sitting beside him, with Lily asking small, careful questions, with me explaining each step in simple terms, he began to understand. Not completely, but enough. The day we took him to meet Dr. Ellison, he held on to the edge of his jacket, like it was the only thing keeping him grounded. Michael drove. I sat in the back seat with Ethan. Lily stayed home, though she had asked if she could come. "Let's do this one step at a time," I told her. She nodded, but I could see the curiosity in her eyes, and something else, compassion. At the clinic, Ethan stayed close to Michael at first, every movement cautious, every sound making him tense slightly. But Dr. Ellison was exactly what he needed. She didn't rush him, didn't overwhelm him. She asked simple questions, gave him space to answer or not answer. By the end of the session, something subtle had shifted. Not a breakthrough, not a miracle, but a beginning. When we got back to the car, Ethan was quieter than usual. Not withdrawn, just thoughtful. "That wasn't bad," he said after a while. Michael let out a breath he had probably been holding all morning. "I'm glad," he said. That moment stayed with me because it was the first time I had seen Ethan experience something new without fear taking over completely. It was small, but it mattered. Back at home, things were still complicated. Lily was adjusting in her own way. At first, she kept her distance. Not out of fear, but uncertainty. She didn't know how to act around Ethan, didn't know what was expected of her. One evening, about a week after everything came to light, I found her sitting at the kitchen table with a notebook open in front of her. She wasn't writing, just staring at the page. "What's on your mind?" I asked, sitting across from her. She hesitated. "Is he going to be okay?" she asked. The question was simple, but the answer wasn't. "I think he has a chance to be," I said carefully. She nodded slowly. "Because of us. Because of a lot of things I said, but yes, we're part of it." She looked down at her notebook. "I don't want him to feel like he has to hide," she said quietly. The same thing she had said before, but this time there was more weight behind it. "He won't," I said. "Not anymore." A few days later, something happened that none of us expected. Ethan came upstairs on his own, not in panic, not confused, just curious. Michael and I were in the living room when we heard footsteps on the stairs. We both looked up at the same time. Ethan stood there, hesitating. "I was just looking," he said. Michael smiled gently. "That's okay." Ethan stepped into the room slowly, taking everything in, the couch, the windows, the light. It was such a simple moment, but it felt significant, like watching someone step into a world they had been shut out of for too long. Lily appeared in the doorway a few seconds later. She froze briefly when she saw him. Then she walked in. "Hey," she said. Ethan looked at her. "Hey," another simple exchange, but this time it felt different, less fragile, less uncertain. They sat in the same room for a while after that, not talking much, just existing, and somehow that was enough. That was progress, but the real turning point came a few days later. Ethan asked for something. "I have a box," he said quietly one evening. Michael looked up. "What kind of box from before?" Ethan said. Michael's expression shifted. "Where is it?" "In the room," Ethan replied. We all knew which room he meant. "The basement." Michael stood. "I'll get it." "I want to," Ethan said. There was something in his voice, something firm. Michael hesitated, then nodded. "Okay." We all went down together. This time the basement didn't feel like a place of secrets. It felt like a place of transition. Ethan walked into the room slowly, then moved toward a small corner where a worn cardboard box sat partially hidden behind a stack of supplies. He picked it up carefully, like it mattered, like it was important, because it was. When we brought it upstairs, he placed it on the coffee table. His hands hovered over it for a moment before opening it. Inside were old photographs, letters, small personal items, pieces of a life that had been paused for too long. He picked up one of the photographs. It showed two young boys, Michael and Ethan, before everything had changed, before everything had been broken. Michael stared at the photo for a long time. Then Ethan handed him something else, a folded letter. "It's yours," he said. Michael took it slowly. "What is it?" "I wrote it," Ethan said when Ethan looked down. "A long time ago." Michael unfolded the paper carefully. As he read, his expression changed. His face tightened, then softened, then broke. Tears filled his eyes. "I didn't know you still had this," he said. Ethan shrugged slightly. "I kept it." Michael looked at him. "What does it say?" I asked gently. Michael swallowed, then read aloud, "I don't blame you for leaving. I just wish you came back sooner." The room went completely still. No one spoke, no one moved, because in that moment, everything we had been carrying finally found its way to the surface. The guilt, the silence, the years lost. Michael lowered the letter slowly, his hands trembling. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice breaking. Ethan nodded. "I know." And just like that, something shifted. Not fixed, not healed completely, but opened, released. For the first time, it didn't feel like the past was something they were running from. It felt like something they were finally facing, together. And as I stood there watching them, I realized something I hadn't expected. The locked room downstairs had never really been about hiding Ethan. It had been about hiding pain, shame, guilt, all the things that had been buried for far too long. And now, that door was open. Time didn't fix everything, but it changed the way things felt. 3 months after the night I opened the locked room, our house was quieter again, but not in the same way it used to be. The silence no longer felt like something hiding beneath the surface. It felt breathable, honest. The basement door stayed open now. That was one of the first decisions we made together. No more locks, no more hidden spaces. At first I didn't think much about it. It was just a practical change, something symbolic but simple. But over time, I realized it was more than that. It was a line, a boundary, a reminder that whatever happened in this house from now on would happen in the open. Ethan no longer lived in the basement. A few weeks after we connected him with Dr. Ellison, he was accepted into a specialized residential trauma program, not the kind of place he had been before, not something cold or overcrowded, but a structured environment where he had access to consistent care therapy and support. The decision hadn't been easy. The day he left, he stood in the living room holding a small bag of his things, looking uncertain. "Am I coming back?" he asked. Michael swallowed. "You can visit," he said, "and we'll come see you." Ethan nodded slowly. That seemed to be enough. Before he walked out, he turned to Lily. "Thanks for not being mad," he said. Lily shrugged a little. "I was mad," she admitted. "Just not at you." Ethan gave a small, almost shy smile. Then he looked at me. "Thank you," he said. "For what I asked, gently. For opening the door," he replied. The words stayed with me long after he left, because he was right. Everything had started with that one decision. The moment I chose to stop waiting and see the truth for myself. After Ethan moved into the program, the house felt different again, not empty, just lighter. Michael and I started therapy together, not because everything was broken beyond repair, but because we understood now that what we had been through couldn't be ignored or patched over. Trust doesn't rebuild itself. It has to be worked on. Sometimes slowly, sometimes painfully. There were difficult conversations about the lies, about the years Michael had kept Ethan a secret, about the way he had decided things for both of us without giving me a voice. "I thought I was protecting you," he said during one session. "I know," I replied, "but protection without honesty isn't protection, it's control." That was a hard truth for him to sit with, but he didn't run from it, not anymore, and that mattered. Lily changed too. At first, I worried the whole situation would leave her feeling unstable, like her foundation had cracked in a way that would follow her for years. But something else happened instead. She became more open, more willing to ask questions, more aware that people could be complicated and that truth mattered even when it was uncomfortable. One evening, as we were sitting at the dinner table, she looked at Michael and said, "You know, if something's wrong in the future, you should just say it." Michael nodded. "I will." "You better," she added. There was no anger in her voice, just expectation and trust. Fragile, but still there. The basement changed the most. We didn't leave it the way it was. We couldn't. Too many memories, too much weight, so we cleared it out. The bed, the medical equipment, the boxes, everything. We repainted the walls a soft, warm color, installed better lighting, opened the small window near the ceiling that had been shut for years. And slowly, piece by piece, we turned it into something new. A reading room, a quiet space, a place where Lily sometimes did her homework, where Michael occasionally sat in the evenings, where I would go when I needed to think. The transformation wasn't just physical, it meant something. That the place that had once held secrets now held light. That something hidden had become something shared. Sometimes I would sit down there alone and think about the woman I had been before all of this started, the version of me who believed she understood her life completely, who thought that if something was wrong, she would see it immediately. I don't think that version of me was naive. I think she trusted the world she had built, and in some ways that trust had been broken, but not in the way I expected. I thought I was uncovering betrayal. I thought I was about to find proof that my husband had chosen someone else over our family. Instead, I uncovered something harder, something deeper, the truth about where he came from, the things he had buried, the silence he had learned to survive in, and the cost of carrying all of that alone. If there's one thing I've learned through all of this, it's this: secrets don't stay contained. They don't sit quietly where you leave them. They grow, they spread, they change the shape of everything around them. And the longer they stay hidden, the more damage they do. But I also learned something else, something I didn't expect. Truth doesn't destroy everything. Sometimes it's the only thing that allows you to rebuild. Not the same life, not the same version of trust, but something real, something honest, something stronger in a different way. I thought I was opening a door to catch my husband in a lie. Instead, I opened a door that forced all of us to face the truth. And in the end, that truth didn't break us. It changed us. And somehow, that made all the difference. If you've stayed with me through this story, then you already know this wasn't just about a locked room. It was about what we hide from the people we love and why. Sometimes we tell ourselves we're protecting them, that the truth is too heavy, too complicated, too painful. But the reality is silence has a cost. And that cost doesn't just fall on one person, it spreads into relationships, into trust, into the foundation of a family. What I learned is this honesty doesn't guarantee things won't fall apart, but without it, they almost always will. If you've ever had a moment where your instincts told you something wasn't right, listen to that voice. Not with fear, but with courage. Because sometimes the truth behind that door isn't what you expect. And sometimes it's exactly what needs to be seen. I'd really love to hear your thoughts. What would you have done in my place? Would you have opened that door? Or waited? And where are you watching from right now? If this story moved, you don't forget to like and subscribe. It helps more stories like this reach people who need them. Thank you for being here.